Clara Whitmore signed her name on that marriage contract with a hand so steady it surprised even herself because every single part of her wanted to run. She was 18 years old, 200 miles from the only home she had ever known, and she was about to become the wife of a man whose face she had never seen. Her aunt stood in the doorway holding the contract out like it was something to be disposed of, not something that would decide a young woman's entire life. "Sign it," her aunt said, "before he changes his mind. If this story moves something in you, if you've ever felt like you were too much for some people and not enough for others, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." Now let's go back to the beginning, because what happened to Clara Whitmore in the summer of 1881 will stay with you long after the last word is spoken. Clara Whitmore had learned early in life that some truths arrive quietly wrapped in small moments that nobody else notices. The truth that arrived the morning she turned 18 came wrapped in the sound of her aunt's voice, carrying through the thin walls of the farmhouse, low and certain, and utterly without feeling. "She's a burden we can no longer carry." Clara stood in the hallway with a bowl of oatmeal in both hands, still warm from the stove, and she did not move. She had been awake since 4 in the morning. She had milked the cows, fed the chickens, hauled water from the well, and started breakfast for 7 people, all before the sun had fully risen over the Ohio flatland. And her aunt was telling her neighbor in that carefully quiet voice that was somehow louder than a shout that Clara Whitmore was a burden. She set the bowl down on the hallway table. She walked back to the kitchen. She did not cry. She had stopped crying about things like that somewhere around her 15th year, when she realized that her tears made the people around her uncomfortable rather than compassionate, and that their discomfort always managed to become her fault. It was a useful lesson. Hard, but useful. Clara's parents had died of fever in the winter of 1875 when she was 12 years old, and her younger brother Thomas was 9. Thomas had been taken in by their father's brother, a kind man with a prosperous farm, and a wife who had always wanted children. Clara had been sent to her mother's sister Edna Hargrove, who lived in a 2-story house in Millbrook, Ohio, with her husband Gerald and their 3 daughters. Edna had accepted Clara the way you accept a piece of furniture that doesn't quite fit the room. She put her somewhere useful and tried not to look at her too directly. From the very first week, Clara understood her position in that house. She was not a niece. She was not family in the warm sense of that word. She was labor. She cooked. She cleaned. She mended clothes and churned butter and scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled in winter. She helped with the younger girls' lessons and sat with Gerald when his back gave out and he needed someone to read to him from the newspaper. She did all of this without complaint, because she had been told in ways both direct and indirect that complaint was a luxury she had not earned. "You ought to be grateful," Edna told her at least once a week, sometimes more. "There are girls in your situation who ended up in far worse places. At least here you have a roof." Clara was grateful for the roof. She genuinely was. But gratitude and belonging are 2 different things entirely. And Clara Whitmore had not once in 6 years under that roof felt like she belonged anywhere on earth. Part of it was her body. She had always been large, not in the way of illness or neglect, but simply in her own natural shape, the kind of build that some women carry with ease and others spend their whole lives apologizing for. Clara spent most of her childhood apologizing for it. The girls at church whispered. The boys at the general store made comments they thought were clever. Even Edna had a particular expression she wore when she looked at Clara. Not cruelty exactly, but a kind of quiet disappointment, as if Clara's body were a personal inconvenience. "If you were smaller," Edna said once, and then stopped herself, as if the rest of the sentence was too honest to finish. Clara finished it in her own head. She had plenty of practice finishing sentences people started and couldn't bring themselves to complete. If you were smaller, someone might actually want you. If you were smaller, this would all be easier. If you were smaller, you might have a future worth speaking of. She was 18 now, and the question of her future had become the loudest thing in the Hargrove household, though nobody spoke it directly to her face. She heard it in fragments in the low voices behind closed doors, in the careful way Edna's oldest daughter, Margaret, talked about her own upcoming courtship as if Clara's presence in the room was an awkward reminder of something unpleasant. Nobody had ever courted Clara Whitmore. There had been one boy briefly when she was 16, a farmhand named Dale Pryor, who had smiled at her twice at the summer social, and then stopped smiling when his friends made a joke she couldn't quite hear but understood perfectly. That had been the beginning and the end of Clara's romantic history. She told herself she didn't mind. She was a very skilled liar when she needed to be. It was a Thursday morning in late June when everything changed. Clara was cleaning the kitchen table after breakfast. Gerald and Edna had left to visit neighbors. The girls were somewhere in the yard, and she was working with the kind of focused mechanical efficiency she had developed over years of doing tasks that nobody noticed when they were done correctly, and everyone noticed when they weren't. There was a stack of old newspapers piled against the wall, waiting to be used for kindling. Clara was moving them to make room when one slipped from the pile and fell open at her feet. She would have stepped over it without looking, except that something caught her eye. Not the headlines, not the news from Washington, or the cattle prices, or the weather reports. A small advertisement in the lower right corner of the page. It was 3 lines long. Nothing more. Rancher in Colorado Territory seeks honest woman for wife. No wealth required. No beauty required. An honest woman with courage and a willing heart. Write to Ethan Walker. Walker Ranch, Summit County, Colorado. Clara read it 3 times. Then she sat down in the kitchen chair, the one that wobbled slightly, that nobody ever chose to sit in, and she read it again. She had read many such advertisements over the years. Mail-order bride notices were not uncommon in the papers, and most of them had the uncomfortable quality of livestock auction listings. A series of desired specifications, as if a woman were a parcel to be ordered and delivered according to preference. Most of them asked for youth, for health, for a pleasant appearance, for skills in domestic management, for willingness and compliance, and the careful suppression of individual character. This one asked for courage. Clara folded the newspaper in her lap. She sat with it for a long time. Through the kitchen window, she could hear her cousins laughing at something in the yard. She could hear the sound of the neighbor's farm somewhere in the distance. She could hear the ordinary sounds of a Thursday morning in Ohio, a morning exactly like all the other mornings, stretching out in front of her like a road she had already walked 1,000 times and would walk 1,000 more times without ever arriving anywhere new. She got up and found a piece of paper. She sat back down at the wobbling chair. And for 30 minutes she stared at the blank page, trying to figure out how to introduce herself to a stranger without lying and without telling the full truth. Because the full truth that she was a plain, large-bodied, penniless orphan who had never been wanted anywhere she had ever lived did not seem like the kind of letter that earned a reply. Then she put the pen to the paper and wrote exactly that. Not those words, but the truth of those words wrapped in as much dignity as she could manage. Dear Mr. Walker, my name is Clara Whitmore. I am 18 years old, an orphan, living with relatives in Millbrook, Ohio. I have no wealth to offer, and no exceptional skills that would recommend me above other women who might write to you. I am not small. I am not considered beautiful by the people who know me. I work hard. I am honest to a fault, which some people find inconvenient. I have never been to Colorado, and I know very little about ranch life, but I am not afraid of difficult work. If you are looking for a woman who will be truthful with you from the beginning, I can promise you that at least. I understand if that is not enough. Sincerely, Clara Whitmore. She sealed the letter before she could change her mind. She walked 3 miles to the post office in town, and she mailed it. She told no one. She waited. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Clara had nearly convinced herself that the silence was its own answer, that the advertisement had been a lie, or that Ethan Walker had received 100 letters from more promising women and simply never gotten to hers, or that he had read her careful, honest sentences and decided that honesty was not in fact what he was looking for, when a letter arrived at the Hargrove house addressed to Miss Clara Whitmore, in handwriting that was careful and unhurried, the handwriting of a man who thought about what he wrote before he wrote it. Edna was the one who brought it in from the post box. She held it out to Clara with an Clara could not quite name, not quite suspicion, not quite curiosity, something between the two. Who do you know in Colorado? Edna asked. No one yet, Clara said, and took the letter. She read it in her room with the door closed. Miss Whitmore, I appreciated your letter more than you might expect. Most of the letters I have received began by telling me what the writer could offer. Yours began by telling me what you couldn't. That seems to me like a better kind of honesty than most people manage. I am 35 years old. I lost my wife 4 years ago. I have a ranch in Summit County that is 800 acres and runs about 200 head of cattle. The winters here are serious, and the work is constant, and I will not pretend otherwise. I am not an easy man to live with, but I am a fair one. If you would be willing to correspond further, I would be glad to hear from you. Ethan Walker. Clara read it twice. Then she read the line again. I am not an easy man to live with, but I am a fair one. And something in her chest loosened just slightly, the way a knot loosens when you've found the right end to pull. She wrote back that same evening. They corresponded for 6 weeks. Not long letters. Ethan was not a man of many words, and his letters reflected that, but honest ones. He told her about the ranch, the altitude, the cattle, the way a Colorado winter could turn dangerous in under an hour. He told her about the nearest town, a mining settlement called Ridgeway, 7 miles from the ranch. He told her that the previous summer he had broken 2 ribs when a horse threw him, and that he had set them himself because the nearest doctor was 3 hours away. Clara told him about Millbrook, about her parents, about what it was like to be grateful for shelter that never quite felt like home. She did not make it dramatic. She stated it the way you state weather conditions, not to complain, but because the other person deserved to know the terrain. At the end of the 6th week, Ethan wrote, I would like to offer a formal proposal if you are willing to consider it. You should know that I am king, because I believe you are exactly who you appear to be in your letters, and that is rarer than most people realize. You are not required to answer yes, but I hope that you will. Clara sat with that letter for 2 full days. She thought about Ohio, about the wobbling kitchen chair, about the way Edna looked at her, about Dale Pryor and the joke she couldn't quite hear, about a lifetime of mornings that looked exactly like the morning before. She thought about Colorado, about 800 acres she had never seen, and a man she knew only from careful sentences on paper, and a life that was either the bravest thing she had ever attempted or the most desperate. She wrote back, I accept. I can leave within the month. She told Edna that evening after supper. The kitchen went very quiet. Gerald looked up from his newspaper. The 3 girls stopped whatever they were doing. And Edna set down her coffee cup with a careful, deliberate movement, and looked at Clara across the table with an expression that was complicated in a way Clara had not expected. Colorado, Edna said finally. Yes, ma'am. A ranch. Yes, ma'am. You don't know this man. I know his character, Clara said. That's more than most people have when they marry. Edna was quiet for another moment. Then she said something that Clara would think about for a long time afterward, turning it over the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. I hope he's kind to you, Edna said. I hope that's what he is. It was the closest thing to care that Edna Hargrove had offered her in 6 years, and Clara accepted it for what it was, imperfect, belated, and genuinely meant. Thank you, Clara said. I hope so too. She had 3 weeks. She packed what she owned into a single carpet bag, 2 dresses, a winter coat that had been Margaret's before it became hers, a small Bible that had belonged to her mother, a pair of good walking boots, and the 6 letters from Ethan Walker tied together with kitchen string. On the morning of her departure, Edna pressed $2 into her hand at the door. For emergencies, Edna said, and her voice was stiff with the effort of the gesture. I appreciate it, Clara said. She did. She walked to the train station alone. She bought her ticket. She sat in the 3rd-class car and watched Ohio dissolve behind her through the window, the flat, familiar green of it, going slowly, golden in the late summer heat, and she waited for the grief she expected to feel for the tug of leaving, even leaving a place that had never fully claimed her. What she felt instead was something quieter and stranger. It felt almost like relief. The train ride to Colorado took 3 days. Clara slept sitting up, ate the bread and hard cheese she had wrapped in a cloth, and read the same 6 letters so many times that she had the important parts memorized. She talked to very few people. A woman named Mrs. Caldwell, traveling to visit her daughter in Denver, sat beside her for most of the second day and asked Clara questions with the cheerful relentlessness of someone who considered silence to be a problem requiring immediate correction. "A mail-order arrangement," Mrs. Caldwell said. "Oh, don't be embarrassed, honey. I know 3 women who did exactly that, and every one of them is happier than if they'd stayed home waiting for some farmer's son to notice them." "What's he like?" "He seems like a fair man," Clara said. "Fair," Mrs. Caldwell repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's a good word. Fair is better than handsome. Handsome doesn't shovel the barn in February." Clara almost smiled. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." By the time the train pulled into the small Colorado station at the foot of the mountains, Clara had rearranged her nervousness so many times that it had become something almost manageable. She stood in the aisle, while the other passengers gathered their things, breathing slowly, reminding herself of all the things she had already survived. She had survived 6 years as a charity case in someone else's house. She had survived the particular cruelty of being overlooked every single day. She could survive walking off a train. She stepped onto the platform. The mountain air hit her like something physical, colder and thinner and cleaner than anything she had ever breathed, carrying with it the smell of pine and high rock and distance, and it was so different from Ohio that for a moment she simply stood and breathed it, letting it fill her lungs completely. There were other people on the platform. Men in work clothes. A few women with children. A station worker moving baggage with a flat-wheeled cart. Clara held her carpet bag in both hands and looked for a man who might be Ethan Walker. She did not know what she expected. She found later that she could not have described what she expected if someone had asked. She had no clear picture in her mind, only an impression. Something assembled from his letters. Careful, plain-spoken, more practical than sentimental. A man who had known loss and continued anyway. She saw him before he announced himself. He was standing at the far end of the platform, slightly apart from the other people, tall and broad-shouldered in a dark canvas coat, with a hat pulled low against the mountain wind. His face was weathered in the way of men who work outdoors in extreme weather. Not old exactly, but marked with the kind of lines that come from squinting into high-altitude sun, and from years of holding expression carefully in check. He was watching the platform with an attention that was alert, without being anxious the way a man watches something he is responsible for. His eyes found her. He did not look away. He did not show disappointment. He did not show surprise. He showed nothing at all for a moment, and then he walked toward her. Not hurrying, not hesitating, just moving with the straightforward purpose of a man who had made a decision and was acting on it. And he removed his hat when he was still a few steps away, and he said, "Miss Clara Whitmore." His voice was lower than she had imagined. Quiet the way certain big men are quiet, not because they lack force, but because they've learned that force doesn't require volume. "Yes," she said. "That's me." He looked at her directly. Not the way most men looked at her, not with the quick assessing sweep that catalogued her body before it registered her face, but steadily the way you look at someone you are genuinely trying to know. "I'm Ethan Walker," he said. "I'm glad you made it." 4 words. Clara had been braced for something complicated, for the polite management of concealed disappointment, for the careful recalibration she had watched men perform when reality failed to match expectation. She had been preparing somewhere in the back of her mind for a version of this moment that required her to shrink herself even further, to make herself smaller, in ways she never could manage physically, to apologize preemptively for being exactly who she had told him she was. Instead, she got 4 words. "I'm glad you made it." "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm glad too." He took her carpet bag from her hands, not in a way that suggested she couldn't carry it herself, but in the way of someone who had been taught that you carry things for people when you are able to, regardless of whether they need the help. And he gestured toward a wagon at the edge of the station yard. "It's about an hour to the ranch," he said. "The road gets rough after the first mile. I should have warned you." "I've survived rough roads," Clara said. He glanced at her sideways as they walked. "I don't doubt it," he said. The wagon ride was quiet, in a way that was not entirely uncomfortable. Ethan drove with the relaxed competence of someone who had made this particular journey hundreds of times, and Clara sat beside him, watching the Colorado landscape unfold, the mountains growing larger and more specific as they left the town. Behind the scrub, giving way to pine, the road narrowing and beginning to climb in long switchbacks that gave her occasional glimpses of impossible distance valleys, dropping away below them in shades of green and gold. She had never seen anything like it. She had grown up with flat horizon in every direction. The existence of this much vertical space was something she understood intellectually and was completely unprepared for in reality. "Is it always this?" she started. "Steep," Ethan said. "Big," she said. "Is it always this big?" He considered this for a moment. "I stopped noticing," he said, "a few years back. But I remember when I first came out here. Felt like the land was trying to tell you something." "What was it trying to tell you?" Another pause. Ethan was not a man who answered questions before he had thought about them. "That you're smaller than you think you are," he said. "But not in a bad way. In the way of there's more world than the part you've been living in." Clara looked at the mountains. "I don't mind being small," she said. "I've been told I take up too much space my whole life. Small would be a change." He glanced at her again. She had not meant it to be funny exactly, but something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, something more private than that, an acknowledgement. "You said that in your letter," he said. "That you were told you weren't small." "It seemed relevant," Clara said. "I didn't see the point in misleading you." "No," he said. "I got that." They rode in silence for a while after that. Clara studied the road ahead and thought about the 6 letters tied with kitchen string at the bottom of her bag, and thought about the wobbling kitchen chair in Ohio, and tried very hard not to wonder what she had done. She had done a brave thing. She was fairly certain of that. Whether brave things turned out to be right things was a separate question entirely, and one that the next months were going to answer one way or the other. The ranch appeared in the late afternoon when the light had gone golden and long and the shadows of the pines stretched out across the road ahead of them. She saw it before Ethan announced it, a cluster of low buildings in a mountain meadow, solid and practical, the kind of structures built by someone who cared more about function than appearance. A large barn. A bunkhouse. The main house 2 stories, wood-sided and plain, with a covered porch running across the front. There were 2 ranch hands visible near the barn, big men who looked up when the wagon came in and then went back to their work without ceremony. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Here it is," he said. He said it simply, without apology or flourish, the way you present a thing that is what it is. Clara looked at it. She thought about Edna's house in Ohio, the floral wallpaper and the china cabinet and the careful arrangement of objects that said, "This is a respectable household, a proper household, a household that knows its place in the world." This was nothing like that. This was plainness taken to its essential form. This was a place that existed in order to withstand things. "It's solid," she said. "Built it myself," Ethan said. "Took 2 winters." She heard something in his voice when he said it. Not pride exactly, but the particular care of a man speaking about something he had made with his own hands out of necessity and stubbornness and the refusal to quit. "It's good work," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," he said, and she understood that he meant it. He helped her down from the wagon. His hand was large and rough and completely steady, and he carried her bag to the front door and pushed it open and stood aside. "Come in," he said. "I'll get the fire going. You must be cold." She was cold. She had been cold for the last hour of the drive without quite admitting it. She stepped inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and pine resin and something else she couldn't identify. Something that smelled like the concentrated absence of another person's presence, like a space that had been lived in by one person for a long time. Ethan moved to the fireplace and began laying wood with practiced efficiency. Clara stood in the middle of the main room and looked around. A table, 4 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a bookshelf with a dozen volumes, a window facing west looking out at the mountains in the last light. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "Settle in," he said. "The bedroom's up the stairs, that's yours. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse for now until we've had the ceremony. Reverend Marsh from Ridgeway is coming Friday." "Friday," Clara said. 3 days. "If that's too soon." "It's not too soon," she said. "I just want to be useful in the meantime. I've never been good at settling in. I'd rather work." He straightened up and turned to look at her with that same steady attention he'd shown at the station. "All right," he said. "The stove needs cleaning. There's a crate of supplies that came last week that needs organizing. The root cellar needs an inventory before first frost." "I can do that," Clara said. "All of it." "Give me 2 days," she said. He studied her. "You weren't lying," he said, "in your letters, about not being afraid of work." "I wasn't lying about anything," she said. "I told you that." "I know," he said. "I'm just—" He stopped, started again. "Most people aren't exactly who they say they are in letters." "I've never had the energy for that," Clara said. "Keeping track of a version of yourself that isn't real takes more work than the real thing. I figured if you didn't want the real thing, better to know before the train." He was quiet for a moment. "I want the real thing," he said. It came out simple and direct without ornament in that quiet voice of his that didn't require volume to carry weight. "I've had enough of the other kind." The fire caught behind him, and the room filled with warmth and orange light. Clara Whitmore, 18 years old, stood in the middle of a ranch house in the Colorado mountains and felt for the first time in a very long time something she barely recognized. Not happiness. Not yet. But the particular feeling that comes just before hope, when possibility stops being a rumor and starts being something you might actually be able to reach. She set her carpet bag down on the table. "Where do you keep the cleaning supplies?" she asked. Ethan Walker almost smiled. "I'll show you," he said. Outside, the mountains went dark against the evening sky, enormous and patient, holding the small light of the ranch house in their shadow. The way big things sometimes hold small things, not carelessly, not overwhelmingly, but with the quiet indifference that is not unkindness, that is simply the nature of a world large enough to contain everything. Clara did not sleep well that first night. She lay in the upstairs bedroom, her bedroom a thought so foreign she had to repeat it, and listen to the sounds of the ranch settling around her, the wind off the peaks, the creak of the structure, the distant sound of cattle. She stared at the ceiling and went through one by one every reason she had to be afraid. There were many. She did not know this man. She did not know this land. She did not know how to run a ranch, or survive a Colorado winter, or be a wife in any sense of that word, since nobody had ever prepared her for the ordinary business of partnership, and nobody had ever suggested that such preparation was something she would need. She went through all of it carefully, the way she had taught herself to face difficult things, not looking away, not pretending, just looking straight at the truth of it, until it lost some of its power to frighten her. And then she thought about 4 words. "I'm glad you made it." She thought about the way he had taken her bag without making a production of it. The way he had answered her question about the mountains. There's more world than the part you've been living in, like someone who had thought about it himself. The way he had said, "I want the real thing," without apology or performance. She thought about the wobbling kitchen chair. She thought about Ohio. She closed her eyes. In the morning, she got up before dawn, found her way to the kitchen, and started a fire in the cast-iron stove. She was making coffee when Ethan came through the back door at first light, stamping mud from his boots. He stopped when he saw her. "You don't have to," he started. "I know," Clara said. "Do you take it black?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. She poured 2 cups. They sat at the kitchen table in the early mountain silence and drank their coffee, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the quiet was not the same as the quiet in Ohio. Not the quiet of being ignored. Not the quiet of someone calculating your worth and finding the number insufficient. It was just quiet. 2 people in the same room at the beginning of something, with the mountain morning coming in gray and cold through the window, and no way to know yet how any of it was going to turn out. But Clara Whitmore had made it here. That was the beginning. and beginnings she had decided were enough. The wedding happened on a Friday morning with no flowers, no music, and no guests, except the two ranch hands who stood near the barn doorway with their hats in their hands, and the uncomfortable expressions of men who had been asked to witness something they weren't entirely sure they understood. Reverend Marsh was a small, precise man who drove 7 miles from Ridgeway in a buggy that looked like it had survived several wars and intended to survive several more. He performed the ceremony on the front porch of the ranch house with the speed and efficiency of someone who had done this many times in many improbable locations and had long since stopped requiring the occasion to feel ceremonial. "Do you, Ethan James Walker, take this woman?" "I do," Ethan said before the Reverend had finished the sentence. Reverend Marsh paused, looked over his spectacles. "I hadn't gotten to the part yet where you were supposed to say that," he said. "I know what the part is," Ethan said. "I've heard it before." Marsh cleared his throat and continued. When he got to Clara's portion, she answered the full question, all of it, every word, because she had been waiting 18 years for someone to ask her something important, and she intended to take the whole measure of the moment. "I do," she said. Ethan looked at her. She looked back. Marsh pronounced them. Married accepted the small payment. Ethan pressed into his hand, climbed back into his battered buggy, and drove away down the mountain road without ceremony. One of the ranch hands, a broad, sunburned man named Dutch, walked over and removed his hat fully. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said, and the man was so carefully respectful that Clara felt something twist behind her sternum. She had never been called ma'am before, not once. "Thank you, Dutch," she said. He put his hat back on and went back to work. That was it. That was the wedding. Ethan stood beside her on the porch, and they watched the Reverend's buggy disappear around the first bend of the mountain road, and then Ethan said, "I'm sorry it wasn't more." Clara considered this. "I've been to more elaborate things that meant less," she said. "I'll take real over elaborate any day." He looked at her sideways. "You say things like that," he said, "and then you just keep moving, like you've been carrying them around for years and you finally got somewhere to set them down." She thought about that. "Maybe I have," she said. They went inside. Clara made breakfast. Ethan went out to the cattle. The day continued forward in the plain and practical manner of all the days that followed it, and their marriage settled into a shape that was not romantic in any conventional sense, but was something perhaps more durable. The shape of two people who had decided to be honest with each other and were discovering slowly how rare that was. But nothing about those early weeks was easy. Not for a moment. The first time Clara tried to help with the morning feeding, she dropped a feed bucket into the horse stall and spooked a mare so badly that the animal kicked a board clean out of the stall wall. Dutch had to spend an hour repairing it. He did not say anything to Clara about it. He did not have to. She could see the careful blankness in his face that people wore when they were being deliberately patient, and that blankness was worse than a reprimand. "I'll pay more attention next time," she told him. "Ain't a problem, ma'am," he said, still carefully blank. She went back to the house and stood at the kitchen window and pressed both hands flat on the counter and breathed slowly until the humiliation had settled back down into something she could manage. She had learned early in life that embarrassment only had power if you let it stop you. She did not intend to stop. Ethan came in for the midday meal, and he must have seen something in her face because he set his coffee down and said, "Dutch told me about the bucket." "I know," Clara said. "I startled the mare. I'll be more careful." "It happens," Ethan said. "Not to people who know what they're doing," Clara said. "I don't know what I'm doing. You knew that when you wrote back to me. I need you to teach me, Ethan. I'm not asking you to make it easy. I'm asking you not to let me keep making the same mistakes." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "All right what?" "All right, I'll teach you," he said. "Starting tomorrow morning. You'll come out with me at 4. 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock. The cattle don't care what time it is." "Fine," she said. 4 o'clock. He picked up his coffee again. "You're not scared of early mornings, are you?" he said. "I was up at 4 in Ohio," Clara said. "Different work, same hour." Something passed across his face, not pity, but something adjacent to it, something that was more like recognition, like a man who understands the outline of a story without needing all the details. "Same hour everywhere, I suppose," he said quietly. She was out before 4 the next morning, standing in the cold mountain dark with her coat pulled tight, waiting for him by the barn door. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw her there. "You're early," he said. "I told you I wasn't afraid of early," she said. He handed her a pair of heavy leather gloves without comment, and they went to work. He taught her the way a man teaches who has no gift for teaching patiently, but plainly demonstrating rather than explaining, correcting without fanfare, repeating without frustration. He showed her how to read the cattle, how to move among them without triggering panic, how to check a fence line for breaks, how to read the weather in the color of the morning sky. That last thing she was surprised to discover came to her quickly. She had always read people, had always understood with an accuracy that she mostly kept to herself, what a person was feeling underneath what they were saying. Animals, she found, were not so different. They told you everything if you were paying attention. "She's not eating right," Clara said one morning 3 weeks after her lessons had begun, standing near a heifer in the south pasture. Ethan looked up from what he was doing. "Which one?" "The red one, second from the fence. She's standing wrong too, her left rear." Ethan walked over, crouched down, examined the animal with the focused attention of someone who had been doing this for 20 years and still took nothing for granted. He stood up. "Hoof rot starting," he said. "Early stage. Another week, and it would have cost us the leg." He looked at Clara with an expression that was almost startled. "How long have you been watching her?" he asked. "Since yesterday morning," Clara said. "I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure I was right." "You were right," he said. She nodded, accepting this without making a performance of it. But she saw the way he looked at her after that, the slight recalibration in his eyes, the way a man adjusts his understanding of something he thought he already knew. It was a small thing. But in the arithmetic of those early weeks, small things accumulated. The second ranch hand, a younger man named Percy, who had the look of someone permanently startled by his own existence, was less careful than Dutch about concealing his opinions, and his opinions about Clara were not subtle. She heard him talking to Dutch behind the barn one afternoon in late September, his voice carrying in the thin mountain air. "I don't understand it," Percy said. "Man like Ethan Walker, he could have done better than—" He lowered his voice, but not quite enough. "She ain't exactly what you'd picture." There was a pause. "I'd be careful about finishing that sentence," Dutch said flatly. "I'm just saying." "I heard what you're saying," Dutch said. "And if Ethan hears it, you'll be looking for work in the next county." Another pause. "She caught the Dawson heifer's rot," Dutch added. "Yesterday morning, before any of us saw it." Percy was quiet. "That animal would have been lame by winter," Dutch said. "So I'd reconsider whatever it is you're picturing." Clara stood on the other side of the barn wall and listened to the silence that followed, and she waited for the familiar drop in her chest, the old hollowing pain of being discussed, like something to be assessed and found wanting. It came. It always came. But something else came with it this time. Something she hadn't felt in Ohio, or in Millbrook, or in any of the spaces where people had measured her and written their conclusions in the careful arithmetic of their expressions. Anger, not the defeated inward kind she had learned to manage. Something cleaner than that. Something with a spine in it. She stepped around the corner of the barn. Both men turned. Dutch's face went carefully neutral. Percy went red from his collar to his hairline. "Ma'am," Dutch said. Clara looked at Percy directly. "You're welcome to think whatever you'd like," she said, and her voice was completely level. "I can't stop that. But I'll work as hard as any man on this ranch, and I'll pull my weight in ways that count. If that's not what you expected, then I suppose I'll just have to keep surprising you." She walked past both of them and went back to the house. Her hands were shaking slightly, but only slightly, and she had them under control before she reached the door. She did not tell Ethan what had happened. She didn't need to. That evening after supper, Ethan came in from the yard and sat down at the table and said without preamble, "Dutch told me Percy gave you trouble." "Dutch was mistaken," Clara said without looking up from the mending she was doing. Ethan was quiet. "Clara." She looked up. "I'll speak to him," Ethan said. I already did, she said. I don't need you to fight that for me. I need you to let me fight it myself. That was the agreement, wasn't it fair? You said you were a fair man. He studied her for a long moment. Percy leaves Friday, he said. Ethan, not because of you, he said, and his voice had gone quiet in that particular way that meant he had already decided something, and the conversation was informational rather than negotiable. Because I heard him myself, and what I heard isn't something I'll have on my ranch. A man who talks about his employer's wife that way isn't a man I trust around my livestock or my property. That's a business decision. Clara put down the mending. Is it? She said. Mostly, Ethan said. She picked the mending back up. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. You were right earlier. You pulled your weight. The heifer would have gone lame. I know, she said. He almost smiled again. It was becoming a familiar near event, that almost smile of his, like watching someone come to the edge of something and decide each time whether to step off. One day he would, she thought. One day, the almost would become actually. Percy left Friday morning. Dutch stayed. October arrived with cold teeth, and Clara felt the ranch change around her the way a personality shifts when the stakes rise. The work became harder and more constant. Ethan began preparing for winter with a focused urgency that communicated without words. That winter in these mountains was not a season to be underestimated. What do I need to know? Clara asked him one evening, watching him check the seal on the root cellar door with an attention that bordered on grim. About winter here, about surviving it, she said. Not watching you survive it, actually surviving it myself. If something happened to you, if you were out on the range and got caught. Don't borrow trouble, he said. I'm not borrowing it, she said. I'm preparing for it. There's a difference. He looked at her. Then he sat down on the root cellar steps, and he talked to her for an hour. Not a short list of instructions. A real conversation about winter temperatures and snow depth, and the signs of weather turning dangerous, about the emergency supplies in the barn, about the nearest neighbor, a rancher named Caldwell, whose place was 4 miles east, about how to harness a horse in the dark, about what to do if the snow blocked the main road. He talked, and she listened, and she asked questions when she didn't understand something, and he answered without treating her questions as ignorance, treating them instead as the practical intelligence of a person who understood what she needed to learn and was learning it. It was, she thought later, one of the best conversations she had ever had. Not because the subject was pleasant, but because she was being treated like someone who could handle the truth. It was the last week of October when Margaret Hargrove's letter arrived. Clara stood in the kitchen with the envelope in her hands, recognizing her cousin's careful, slightly ostentatious handwriting, and felt a complicated mixture of emotions that she couldn't entirely separate from each other. She opened it. Margaret's letter was long and described in great detail the social events Clara had missed, the courtship Margaret was currently navigating with a merchant's son from Columbus, and the general state of the Hargrove household. It was pleasant reading in the way of reading about a world you once inhabited, and now regard from sufficient distance to find it curious rather than painful. And then, near the end, one paragraph that sat differently from the rest. Mother doesn't say so, Clara, but I think she misses you. Not in the way she'd admit to, but there are mornings when she sets 5 cups instead of 4, and then puts one back when she remembers. I'm not telling you to come home. I know you won't. I'm just telling you what I see. I hope he's good to you. I hope Colorado is what you needed it to be. I hope you are not cold. Clara read that paragraph 3 times. She folded the letter and put it in the Bible with Ethan's 6 letters from the summer, and she stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking out at the mountain afternoon. 5 cups instead of 4. Something loosened in her chest. Something old and quietly aching that she had not fully known was there. Ethan came in from the yard and found her standing at the window. You all right? He asked. Yes, she said. Letter from my cousin in Ohio. Good news. She considered. Complicated news, she said. The kind that's mostly good, but takes some thinking. He hung his coat on the hook by the door. You ever miss it? He asked. Ohio. "I miss the idea of it," she said. "I miss the version of it where I belonged. That version didn't exist, so I suppose what I miss is something that never was." He was quiet for a moment. "I know that," he said. "Missin' something that was never quite real." She looked at him. There were things about Ethan Walker that Clara had learned slowly in pieces. The way you learn the geography of a place you are living, rather than visiting not from a map, but from repeated contact with the actual ground. She had learned that he had been married before, and that his wife Sarah had died in childbirth 4 years ago, and that the child had not survived either. She had learned that he had come to Colorado from Tennessee at 22, with nothing but a horse and a determination she could only imagine. She had learned that he genuinely read, not just the newspaper, but books worn volumes on the shelf that he had carried from place to place, the way you carry things that matter. She had not learned what he had meant when he said in his second letter that he had had enough of the other kind of people who were not quite who they said they were. She thought she understood now. "Sarah," she said. It was not a question. He looked at her with an expression that was not pain or not only pain, but the complicated face of a man who had been carrying something for so long that he had stopped noticing the weight until someone else pointed to it. "She was a good woman," he said. He stopped. "She was afraid of this place, from the beginning. She came because she wanted to make me happy, and she stayed because she felt she had to, and she was afraid every day, and she didn't tell me, and then—" He stopped again. "I should have known. I should have paid more attention to what she wasn't saying." "You couldn't have stopped what happened," Clara said. "No," he said. "But I could have made it easier. I didn't know how to make it easier. I didn't know how to let someone be afraid." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "I'm afraid sometimes," she said. "I was afraid the whole first week. I didn't sleep." He looked at her quickly. "You didn't show it," he said. "I know," she said. "But I'm telling you now. So you know that you can pay attention to it. So you know that it's something I can tell you." The kitchen was very quiet. "All right," Ethan said finally. "All right," Clara said. She turned to the stove and began preparing supper, and he went to the table and sat down with a book, and the ordinary mountain evening continued around them, and neither of them said anything more about it. But something had shifted. Not dramatically. Not in the way that makes a good story by itself, but in the way that matters, the quiet foundational way that changes the shape of everything built on top of it. November came in hard. The first real snow arrived on a Tuesday night, and by Wednesday morning, the world outside was white in every direction that Clara could see from any window of the ranch house. She stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and watched the white, and felt to her own surprise something close to wonder. She had not expected to find beauty here. She had expected survival hard work, the satisfaction of earning her place. She had not expected the particular way the Colorado winter transformed everything it touched into something austere and enormous, and quietly magnificent. She was still standing there when Ethan came downstairs. "First big snow," he said, stopping beside her. "Yes," she said. He looked at her face. "You're not frightened," he said. "No," she said, and she sounded a little surprised herself. "I thought I would be." "Most people are," he said. "I'm not most people," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that expression. She was slowly learning to read the one that appeared when she said something that he had not expected, and that recalibrated something in his understanding of her. "No," he agreed. "You're not." They drank their coffee side by side at the window. That was all. But it was also, in its quiet way, everything. The trouble arrived on a Friday in the second week of November, in the form of 3 men on horseback who rode into the ranch yard around noon, while Ethan was out checking the cattle in the east pasture and Dutch was in town for supplies. Clara was alone in the house. She heard the horses and looked out the window and saw them before they knocked 3 men well-dressed in the prosperous way of men who wanted you to notice the expense, with horses that were too good for simple ranch work and expressions that were too settled for honest inquiry. The one in front was perhaps 50 heavy-set, with a face that had probably been handsome once and had since moved into an impression of authority. He knocked on the door like he owned it. Clara opened it. "Ma'am," he said, and the ma'am had nothing in common with Dutch's ma'am. This one was a formality, a veneer. "We're looking for Ethan Walker." "He's out on the range," Clara said. "Is there something I can help you with?" The man's eyes moved over her with a thorough lack of interest that was its own kind of assessment. "I'm Harold Voss," he said. "I own the Voss Consolidated operation in the valley. I've got a proposal for Walker that's time-sensitive. We can wait." "You're welcome to come in and wait," Clara said, "though I don't know when he'll be back." She stepped aside. Voss came in. His two men stayed on the porch, which was its own message. Voss sat at the kitchen table without being invited to and looked around the main room with the evaluating eye of a man who was accustomed to calculating the worth of things. "You're the wife," he said. "I am," Clara said. "Clara Walker." Voss nodded slowly. "He married a mail-order woman," he said, not to her exactly, more like a notation for himself. "I'd heard that." "Is that a problem?" Clara said. He looked at her directly for the first time. "It's a curiosity," he said. "A man like Walker could have—" He stopped himself in the way of a man who remembers just in time that he is in someone's home. "Could have what?" Clara said. The pause was significant. "Done better for himself, I suppose," Voss said. "Out here, a man's wife is part of his standing. It reflects on his circumstances." Clara looked at him steadily. "Mr. Voss," she said, and her voice was perfectly pleasant. "I'd offer you coffee, except that I find I'm less inclined to do that than I was 5 minutes ago. Ethan should be back within the hour. You're welcome to wait outside." Voss blinked. He had not clearly expected that. He stood slowly. "I didn't mean to give offense," he said. "Yes, you did," Clara said. "You just didn't expect it to be noticed." She held the door. He went out. She closed it behind him. She stood in the kitchen and breathed carefully and listened to the sound of her own heartbeat until it had returned to something ordinary. Her hands, she noticed, were perfectly steady. She had not shaken at all. That was new. Ethan returned an hour later to find 3 men waiting in his yard and came straight to the house first, reading something in the arrangement of things that told him to check there before anything else. Clara told him briefly and factually what had happened. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He said you could have done better," he said. "He implied it," Clara said. "I translated." "And you put him outside." "I offered him coffee first," Clara said. "Up until the point where he suggested your wife was a liability to your standing." Ethan looked at her. "Clara." "I know," she said. "I should probably have been more diplomatic. If this is someone you need to do business with—" "I don't need to do business with anyone who speaks that way about my wife in my own kitchen," Ethan said. His voice was still quiet, but the quality of the quiet had changed. It had acquired an edge that was not anger exactly, or not the hot kind. Something colder, something settled. He went outside. Clara watched through the window. She could not hear what was said. She could only watch the arrangement of bodies, Ethan standing in front of Voss, with a stillness that communicated entirely without gesture that this conversation was going to go one way and not another. Voss spoke. Ethan listened. Ethan spoke. Voss's posture changed incrementally, the slight deflation of a man who has overestimated his position. They shook hands eventually. Whatever the proposal had been, a version of it had apparently survived the adjustment. The 3 men rode out. Ethan came back inside. "Business concluded," Clara said. "He wants to run his cattle across my east range in spring," Ethan said. "For a fee. It's fair money." And he'll watch his manners," Ethan said simply. He understood that. Clara turned back to the stove. "Good," she said. A pause. "You're not going to ask what I said to him," Ethan said. "No," Clara said. "I trust that it was fair." The silence behind her felt different from other silences. It had a quality she was learning to identify the particular weight of a moment in which Ethan Walker was deciding something. Some internal calculation running its course before he spoke or didn't speak. "I told him," Ethan said slowly, "that my wife caught a hoof infection in a 200-head herd that 3 experienced men had missed, and that she'd reorganized my supply stores and cut our winter waste by 1/3. and that any man who thought that kind of woman was a liability to my standing was a man who didn't understand what standing actually meant. Clara stood very still. She did not turn around. She was not sure if she turned around that she would be able to keep her expression in the controlled and practical arrangement she had learned to maintain. "Thank you," she said finally to the stove. "I was stating facts," Ethan said. "I know," she said. "Thank you anyway." She heard the chair push back from the table. She heard him stand. "Clara," he said. She turned. I was looking at her the way he sometimes looked at the mountains, with a kind of attention that was not quite reverence and not quite wonder, but occupied the territory between them. "I'm glad you answered that advertisement," he said. She held his gaze. "So am I," she said. And she meant it completely, without reservation, without the private asterisk she had been applying to her own hope since she'd first stepped off that train. She meant it the way you mean things when you have arrived finally at the place where honesty costs you nothing, because you are no longer afraid of what the truth might cost. Outside, the Colorado mountains held the afternoon in their enormous patience, white and indifferent and endlessly large. And inside the ranch house, Clara Walker stood in her kitchen and felt for the first time in her life like someone who had arrived, not at a destination, at herself. Winter settled into the mountains the way it always did, not with warning, not with the courtesy of a gradual descent, but with the sudden absolute authority of something that has been waiting and has finally decided to stop waiting. By the first week of December, the ranch existed inside a world that was entirely white and entirely serious, and Clara had learned in the weeks since the first snow that Ethan's word for this place had been exactly right. Serious, not cruel, not beautiful exactly, though it was both of those things at different hours of the day. Serious in the way of something that required your full attention at all times, and would not forgive you the moments when you forgot that requirement. She had not forgotten it once. She was up before 4 every morning now without being told, without the alarm of necessity driving her out of bed, but simply because her body had adjusted to the rhythm of the ranch, the way a person's body adjusts to any truth it lives inside long enough. She knew the sound of every door in the house. She knew which floorboard in the hallway creaked and which one would hold silent. She knew the way the wind moved around the north corner of the barn and what it meant when it shifted direction in the night. She knew the cattle now, not just their conditions, but their personalities, their habits, the particular way that the big red steer she had privately named Walter always positioned himself at the front of the herd when something made him uneasy, like a large and not very bright sentry who was nonetheless sincere about his duties. Dutch had noticed her noticing. "You've got a feel for them," he told her one morning in a voice stripped of everything except plain observation. Dutch was a man what he saw, and nothing more, and Clara had come to value that in the same way she valued a level floor, not exciting, but trustworthy. "I grew up watching people," she said. "Animals aren't that different." Dutch considered this. "I reckon that's true," he said. "They're easier some ways. They don't lie to you." "No," Clara said. "They don't." It was the longest conversation she and Dutch had ever had, and she thought about it later, not because of what it contained, but because of what it represented. She was becoming part of this place. Not just living in it. Part of it. The way a piece of wood that has been in water long enough stops being foreign to the water and becomes something the water moves around naturally. She had not expected to belong anywhere. She had stopped believing in belonging somewhere around her 14th year. And now here she was in the mountains of Colorado, in the first serious winter of her married life, and the word that kept arriving quietly and without fanfare was exactly that one. Belonging. The letter from Ohio came in the second week of December, and it was not from Margaret this time. It was from Edna. Clara stood at the kitchen table with the envelope in her hands for a moment before opening it the way you stand before something that might change the temperature of the room. Edna's handwriting was cramped and deliberate, the handwriting of a woman who had been taught penmanship as a discipline rather than a pleasure and had never quite forgiven it. The letter was short. "Clara, I am writing because Margaret tells me you seem well, and I am glad to hear it. Gerald's back has been troubling him. The girls are fine. I want to say something that I have not said, and perhaps should have. You worked hard in this house, and I did not always recognize that the way I should have. That is all I intend to say on the subject. I hope the man is decent. You deserve decent whatever else you may have thought I believed." Clara read it twice. She set it down on the table. She sat for a moment in the kitchen silence. Then she got up and put the kettle on because the kettle needed putting on, and because some things needed to be received quietly and without ceremony and allowed to settle at their own pace. Ethan came in an hour later and found her at the table with both letters, Margaret's and Edna's, laid out side by side. "Something happened," he said. "Letter from my aunt in Ohio," she said. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her. "Good or bad," he said. "She apologized," Clara said. "In her way, which is a way that doesn't use the word sorry and manages to convey something like it anyway." Ethan was quiet. "How do you feel about it?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Like I've been carrying something heavy for a very long time," she said slowly, "and someone just came and took a corner of it. It doesn't make it light, but it's different to carry." Ethan looked at his coffee. "That's a good way to put it," he said. "Ethan." She hesitated. "Did Sarah's family, were they good to her before you married?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Her mother was," he said. "Her father thought she could have done better." Then a rancher from Tennessee. Then a man who intended to go west and build something from nothing, he said. "That's a reasonable thing to have doubts about, I suppose." "But she came anyway," Clara said. "She came anyway," he said. "She was brave in that way. Just not the winters were hard on her, and I didn't know how to—" He stopped, looked at his hands. "I kept thinking if I just gave her more time, if the place just became familiar enough. I thought familiarity would fix fear, and it doesn't. I know that now." "What does?" Clara said. He looked up. "What fixes fear?" she said. He thought about it. "Feeling like you're not facing it alone," he said. Clara held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees the following week, and with it came a change in Ethan that Clara had not seen before. He became quieter than his usual quiet, more focused, more watchful. The way a man becomes when he is calculating something with variables he can't entirely control. She caught him checking the sky 6-7 times a day. She caught him counting the hay supply in the barn with an attention that bordered on the urgent. "Tell me what you're worried about," she said one evening. He looked at her across the kitchen table. "Henderson's Pass," he said. "The herd on the high pasture. If we get a real storm, not what we've had, but a real one, I'll need to bring them down before the pass closes. Once it closes, those cattle are up there until spring. How long do you have if a storm comes?" "Maybe 6 hours," he said. "Between the first signs and when the pass becomes impassable. Maybe less." "What do the signs look like?" he told her. He described them the way he had described everything about this land, plainly, completely treating her intelligence with the same matter-of-fact respect he would offer any person he needed to rely on. The color of the sky, the behavior of the cattle at lower elevation, the particular quality of the wind off the North Peak. She listened, and she memorized it the way she memorized everything that mattered. "If you're out on the range and you see it coming," she said, "I'll start the fire in the barn and get the hay ready." "Clara." "I know how to do it," she said. "Dutch showed me last week. I asked him." Ethan looked at her. "You asked him," he said. "I told you I don't like making the same mistake twice," she said. "I didn't know how to do it. Now I do." He was quiet for a long moment. "All right," he said. The storm came on a Thursday. Clara woke at 3 in the morning to a sound she had never heard before. Not wind exactly, but something beneath the wind. A pressure change in the air that her body registered before her mind. Did some animal instinct she hadn't known she possessed, informing her with complete authority that something was coming. She was at the window before she was fully awake. The sky to the north was wrong. She could not have described exactly how it was wrong, only that the darkness had a quality to it that was different from ordinary mountain darkness, a density and a stillness. That was not peace, but the absence of something. the held breath before an exhalation that was going to be enormous. She dressed in 30 seconds. She went downstairs and knocked on the back door and opened it before Dutch had finished saying, "Who's there?" "Storm coming," she said. "North sky. Wake Ethan." Dutch looked at her face. He did not argue. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and was moving before she had turned away. Ethan was down the stairs in under 2 minutes half-dressed, reading the sky through the kitchen window with the focused attention of a man whose body also knew how to receive that particular kind of information. 6 hours, he said. Maybe 5. "The high pasture cattle," Clara said. "I have to go up," he said. "I know," she said. "Dutch and I will get the barn ready. How many head are up there?" 63, he said. "Give or take." "Go," she said. He looked at her for one moment, the kind of look that contains more than a look usually carries, that holds a whole complicated weight of feeling in a single held second, and then he grabbed his coat and his hat and went out the door. Clara turned to Dutch. "Barn," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They worked for the next 4 hours, with the focused efficiency of people who understand that their work is the difference between a manageable problem and a catastrophic one. Clara did not think about fear. She thought about hay and fencing positions, and the order in which things needed to happen, and she moved through the work with a certainty that surprised even her. Not the certainty of confidence exactly, but the certainty of necessity, which is a more reliable thing. The wind picked up around 7 in the morning. By 7:30, it was something else entirely. Dutch came to find her at 7:45, and she knew from the way he was moving that something had happened. "He's not back," Dutch said. She looked at him. "The pass closes in about an hour," Dutch said. "Maybe less with this wind." Clara looked at the sky. "The cattle," she said. "Some of them came down on their own, maybe 40 of them. The rest?" He paused. He would have had to go up for the rest. "And the pass?" "Which way is the pass from here?" she said. "Clara." "Which way, Dutch?" He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a man who is calculating whether to argue and has determined correctly that the calculation is not in his favor. "North trail," he said. "Follow the fence line up. But the snow is—" She was already moving. "Clara." He caught her arm. "Not hard, just enough. It's not safe. The snow on that north trail in this wind." "He went up there," she said. "He knows that trail." "I know it too," she said. "He taught me." Dutch looked at her. "He taught me everything about this mountain," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that was not performed, but simply present the steadiness of someone who has made a decision and is no longer in the place where decisions are made. "Get me the rope from the barn, the long one." Dutch let go of her arm. He got the rope. He also, without being asked, got a second coat from the bunkhouse, a heavy lined one, a man's coat too large for her, and held it out without comment. She put it on. "If I'm not back in 2 hours," she started. "I'll come after both of you," Dutch said. She nodded. She went. The north trail in that wind was the hardest physical thing Clara Whitmore had ever done, and she had done difficult things her entire life. The snow was not falling so much as moving horizontally, driven by a wind that had opinions about where she was going and intended to express them with full force. She kept the fence line in her left hand, literally her gloved hand, dragging along the top wire because it was the only navigation she could trust. Her eyes were nearly useless. She went by feel and by memory, and by the certainty that she was moving in the right direction, because Ethan had shown her this trail twice in autumn, and she had memorized it the way she memorized everything that might one day be necessary. She almost missed him. She felt the fence post before she saw anything. Her hand hit a post that was bent at a wrong angle, and she stopped, and she looked down, and she saw the dark shape in the white. Ethan was on the ground near the collapsed section of fence. His right leg caught between 2 posts where the fence had given way under the weight of accumulated snow and ice. He was conscious. She could tell he was conscious because when she dropped beside him and put her hand on his chest, he said something that was mostly obscured by the wind, but contained her name. "I'm here," she said loudly close to his ear. "How bad is the leg?" "Not broken," he said. Caught. I can't get the angle. She looked at the posts. She understood the problem. She braced herself, put both hands on the upper post and pulled with everything she had. And Clara Walker had more than most people expected, because she always had, because her body that people had spent years apologizing for was not a liability, but a fact of her physical reality, and that fact was in this moment exactly what was needed. The post moved. Now, she said. He pulled his leg free. I got to one knee. She grabbed his arm and pulled him upright, and he put his weight on the leg and his face went tight, but he stood. Can you walk? She said. I can walk, he said. Don't lie to me, she said. I'm not lying, he said. It's bruised. I can walk. She pulled the rope from around her shoulder and wrapped it twice around her wrist and held the other end out to him. Stay on my left, she said. I've got the fence line. He looked at her. In that moment with the storm, driving everything sideways, and the world reduced to white, and the cold pressing in from every direction. Ethan Walker looked at his wife with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the almost smile. Not the careful recalibration. Something rawer than either. Something that had been underneath all of it the whole time, and had finally, in the absolute necessity of this moment, come to the surface. Clara, he said. Walk, she said. Tell me later. They walked. It took 40 minutes to cover ground that had taken her 20 minutes going up because Ethan was moving carefully on the bruised leg, and because the wind was now directly against them, and because the snow had deepened in ways that required constant negotiation. She did not talk. She concentrated. She kept the fence line in her left hand and Ethan's weight partially against her right side, and she counted her steps the way she had learned to count difficult things, not to reach a number, but to stay inside the present moment, one step at a time, because the present moment was manageable and everything else was not. When the barn lights appeared through the white, she almost stopped. She had not realized how afraid she was until the fear began to release, and the releasing of it hit her legs in a way she had not anticipated. She kept walking. Dutch met them at the barn door. He took Ethan's other arm without a word, and they got him inside out of the wind, into the smell of hay and animals, and warmth that was in that moment the most welcome thing Clara had ever felt against her skin. Ethan sat down on a hay bale. Dutch looked at the leg. Declared it what Ethan had said, bruised not broken. Got it wrapped. Made no comment whatsoever about anything except the purely practical, which was Clara thought one of the finest qualities Dutch possessed. She stood against the barn wall and breathed. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking now. They had not shaken on the trail. They were shaking now in the warmth and the safety now that her body had finally received permission to register what it had just been through. She did not try to stop them. Ethan looked at her from the hay bale. Clara, he said. She looked at him. Everyone told you to stay inside, he said. Yes, she said. Dutch told you the trail wasn't safe. He did. Why did you come? He said. She looked at him steadily. Because you gave me a home, she said. Because you came to a train platform and you didn't look at me the way people had been looking at me my whole life. Because you said I'm glad you made it, and you meant it. Because you taught me this mountain, and you told me the truth about the winters, and you treated me like someone who could handle the truth. She paused. I wasn't going to leave you up there. Ethan was very still. I wasn't going to leave you, she said again, simply because it was the simplest version of everything she had just said, and it was the one that mattered most. The barn was quiet, except for the sound of the storm outside, and the movement of the cattle inside, and the ordinary breathing of a space that was doing what it was built to do, holding things safe against the weather. I know, Ethan said finally. His voice was different when he said it. Not quiet in his usual way. Something opened in it. Something that had been kept carefully in place for a long time, the way you keep a window in place against heavy wind, and had now simply come loose. He reached out his hand. She crossed the barn and took it. His grip was firm and immediate, the grip of a man holding on to something he intends to keep, and she held back with equal force, because she intended exactly the same thing. Dutch, with the characteristic wisdom of a man who understood when a room needed fewer people in it, found something requiring his urgent attention on the other side of the barn. "I should have said this before," Ethan said. "You didn't have the words yet," Clara said. "I do now." "Then say them," she said. He looked at her, and she understood, watching his face, that this was the moment all the almost smiles had been moving toward, all the careful recalibrations, and the quiet evenings, and the letters tied with kitchen string, and the 4 words at a train platform in the summer. All of it had been moving here, to this barn, to this storm, to this held hand. "I love you," he said. No performance, no ornament. 3 words as plain and solid and true as the barn they were sitting in, built to last, built to hold against whatever the weather brought. Clara felt something move through her that she did not have a name for and did not need one. "I know," she said. And then, because fair was fair and honesty had been the contract between them from the beginning, "I love you too." Outside, the storm did not care about any of this. It continued its enormous impersonal business, driving snow across the mountain and bending the pines and making the world outside the barn walls into something that could not be navigated without courage and knowledge and the willingness to go anyway. Inside, Ethan Walker held his wife's hand and did not let go. And Clara Walker, who had come to this mountain expecting survival and nothing more, sat in a hay-scented barn in the middle of a Colorado blizzard and understood with a certainty that went all the way down to the bone that she had not been traveling toward a ranch or a marriage or even a man. She had been traveling toward this, toward herself finally seen, toward a love that had not required her to be smaller or quieter or less than everything she was. She had been traveling toward a place where someone looked at her full self, her large body, her honest tongue, her stubborn courage, her learning hands, and said without hesitation and without condition that this was exactly what he wanted. She had arrived. The storm would end. The pass would clear. The cattle would be counted, and the fence would be repaired, and the ordinary days of ranch life would resume their practical and necessary rhythm. But something had been decided in that barn that no weather and no amount of ordinary days would ever undo. Clara Walker was home. The storm lasted 3 days. Not 3 days of the kind of weather Clara had known in Ohio. Cold rain, gray skies, the mild inconvenience of mud. 3 days of something that had no equivalent in her previous experience, something that reduced the world to the space between the house and the barn, and demanded with absolute authority that everything else wait. She did not mind the waiting. There was something clarifying about a storm that large. It removed every question except the necessary ones. Are the animals fed? Is the fire stoked? Is everyone accounted for? Is everyone warm? Everything that was not, that could be set aside, and Clara had spent enough of her life carrying things that did not belong to her, that she found the enforced simplicity almost restful. Ethan's leg kept him off it for the first day. He sat at the kitchen table with it elevated on a second chair, and directed operations with the focused precision of a man who was unaccustomed to being stationary, and had decided that if he must be stationary, he would at least be useful. He sent Clara and Dutch out with specific instructions, specific priorities, specific times to check back. He was a thorough and unsentimental commander of a 3-person operation. Clara followed his instructions exactly when they were correct, and modified them without comment when direct observation suggested a better approach, which happened twice on the first day. The second time it happened, she had rerouted the water supply to the south end of the barn when the north pipe began showing signs of freezing. A judgment call she had made on her own, quickly, without consultation. Ethan looked at her when she came back in and said, "That's not what I told you to do." "The north pipe was going to freeze within the hour," she said, stomping snow from her boots. "I rerouted." "Dutch could have." "Dutch was with the cattle," she said. "I was there. I made the call." He was quiet for a moment. "Was I wrong?" she said. A pause. "No," he said. "Then we're fine," she said, and went to pour coffee. She heard him make a sound behind her that was not quite a laugh, something shorter than that, more private. More private, the sound a person makes when they have been surprised by something they find they are glad about. On the second day, when his leg had improved enough that he was moving around the house with only a slight careful quality to his gait that she watched without commenting on, He came to find her in the kitchen in the late afternoon. She was writing a letter. To Edna. He sat down across from her and watched her write without asking what she was writing, which she had come to understand was one of his qualities. He did not ask questions to fill silence. He asked questions when he genuinely wanted to know something, and the rest of the time he simply occupied space without requiring it to be explained. After a while, without looking up from the letter, she said, "I'm writing to my aunt." "I figured," he said. "I'm telling her that I'm well," she said, "and that the ranch is good, and that you are—" She paused, considering the word. "Decent." "Decent," he repeated. "It's a compliment," she said. "From me and from her both." He was quiet. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "After the storm clears," he said, "I want to take you to Ridgeway. Properly. Not just for supplies." "What does properly mean?" she said. "It means I want people to know you're my wife," he said. "Not just know it as a fact. Know it the way it is. I want to walk into that town with you and have a meal at the hotel, and I want people to meet you the way they should have met you from the start." She looked at him. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to." She held his gaze for a moment. "All right," she said. She looked back down at the letter. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah, thank you," she said, "for wanting to." He did not say anything else. He got up and went to the fire and added wood to it, and Clara finished the letter to Edna, and the storm pressed against the windows, and the ranch held. The storm broke on the morning of the third day, with the same abruptness with which it had arrived. Clara woke to stillness. The particular silence that follows. Enormous noise. A silence that has texture to it, that you can feel as a physical presence. She was at the window before she was fully dressed, and she stood there in the gray dawn light, looking at a world that was entirely rearranged. Every familiar line and angle altered by the depth of the snow, the whole mountain remade. 61 cattle had come through. 2 had not found in the south pasture when Dutch went out at first light, lost to the cold rather than the storm itself. Older animals. Animals that had been borderline when winter started. Ethan received this information with the set expression of a man who has known loss before, and has learned to receive it without letting it become larger than it is, which meant he received it with exactly the right amount of gravity and then moved forward. "We account for what we have," he said, "and we work with what we have. That's ranch life." "Yes," Clara said. "Does that bother you?" he said. "Losing them?" "Yes," she said. "It should bother you. If it didn't bother you, I'd worry about you." He looked at her. "I didn't mean it shouldn't bother you," he said carefully. "I know what you meant," she said. "Yes, it bothers me. No, I won't let it stop me from doing what comes next. That's what you were actually asking." He nodded slowly. "You understand me," he said, and it came out sounding slightly like an observation of a phenomenon he was still adjusting to. "I've been paying attention," she said, "since the train." The trip to Ridgeway happened 4 days after the storm cleared, when the main road had been packed down enough by other traffic to be navigable. Ethan drove the wagon, and Clara sat beside him in her good dress, the blue wool one that had been her mother's, and that she had altered twice since coming to Colorado, once to account for mountain work, and once because she had imperceptibly but undeniably begun to carry herself differently, and the dress needed to account for that too. She was not nervous. She had decided somewhere during the storm that she was finished being nervous about the opinions of people who did not know her. Not reckless. She was not reckless, had never been reckless, but done with the preemptive apology, the bracing for disappointment, the making of herself smaller before anyone had even indicated that her full size was a problem. She sat beside Ethan Walker on the wagon seat, and she watched the mountain road open up ahead of them, and she felt exactly what she was, a woman who belonged where she was sitting. Ridgeway was a mining town that had grown faster than it had planned. All mismatched buildings and improvised streets, and the particular energy of a place that was still in the process of deciding what it was going to become. It had a hotel, 2 saloons, a general store, a post office, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and the concentrated social life that develops anywhere people are isolated by geography, and therefore intensely interested in each other's business. Ethan's arrival in town was noted, the way the arrival of any significant landowner is noted in a small community. He was known here, respected in the way of a man whose word was considered reliable and whose land was considered well managed. He was not a social man. Clara already knew that, had known it since the first letter. But he was a known one, which was its own kind of standing. Clara was aware the moment they stepped down from the wagon in front of the general store that she was being looked at. Not cruelly, not uniformly, but with the frank and comprehensive curiosity of people who had heard about Ethan Walker's mail-order wife and were now for the first time seeing her in person and making their calculations. She stood beside her husband on the main street of Ridgway, Colorado, in the winter of 1881, and she let them look. She did not fold her hands or drop her eyes or arrange her expression into the preemptive apology she had spent years deploying. She stood the way she had learned to stand over the past months, with her weight evenly distributed and her shoulders settled and her chin at a level that did not challenge but would not yield. Ethan put his hand at the small of her back. It was a small gesture, completely natural, the way he did it, the way you touch something that is yours, that you are glad is yours. But in the arithmetic of public moments, it was not small at all. It was a statement delivered in the language of the body that required no translation. She felt the room rearrange itself slightly. Not dramatically, not obviously. But she had been reading rooms since childhood, and she felt it. The first person to approach them was a woman Clara had not met. Small, sharp-eyed, perhaps 60, with the upright posture of someone who had decided early in life that her spine was going to be her primary credential. "Ethan," the woman said, "it's been months." "Mrs. Aldrich," he said, "this is my wife Clara." Mrs. Aldrich looked at Clara with eyes that were completely without the social overlay people deployed when they wanted to seem more charitable than they were. She was simply looking, assessing, arriving at a conclusion in real time. "Clara Walker," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "I heard you're the one who went into the North Pass during Thursday's storm," Mrs. Aldrich said, "to bring this one back." "I did," Clara said. Mrs. Aldrich held her gaze for one more moment. "Good," she said. "He needed someone who would." And she walked on. Clara looked at Ethan. "She's the minister's wife," he said. "If Eleanor Aldrich approves of you, you're approved of." "Is that how it works?" Clara said. "In Ridgway," he said. "That's exactly how it works." The hotel dining room was warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee and the particular institutional cooking of places that feed a lot of people without any particular aspiration to artistry. Clara ate roast beef and potatoes and listened to Ethan talk more than she had ever heard him talk in a public setting, which was to say, he spoke in complete sentences, and occasionally more than one in a row, which for Ethan Walker constituted something approaching loquaciousness. He introduced her to the mine superintendent, a man named Baxter, who had enormous hands and a permanently distracted expression. He introduced her to the Caldwells, the neighboring ranchers he had mentioned in his winter preparations speech, a couple in their 50s, who had the comfortable ease of people who had survived a great deal together and had decided to find this fact pleasing rather than exhausting. Ruth Caldwell took Clara's hand with both of hers and said, "We've been meaning to get up to the ranch for weeks. Ethan doesn't socialize." "He's working on it," Clara said. Ruth laughed, a real laugh, uncalculated. "Good," she said. "He's been up there alone too long. A man needs people." "He has Dutch," Clara said. "Dutch doesn't count," Ruth said. "Dutch barely talks." "Dutch talks plenty," Clara said. "You just have to listen at the right speed." Ruth looked at her with the expression of a woman who has just received new and useful information. "You're going to be good for this community," Ruth said. And that was that. It was on the ride home from Ridgway in the late afternoon, with the mountains going gold around them, and the wagon moving steadily up the familiar road, that Ethan said the thing that Clara had been thinking about in one form or another since the barn. "I want to tell you something," he said. "About Sarah." Clara said nothing. She waited. "I've been afraid," he said. "Since she died, I've been afraid that if I let someone in the way I let her in, it would that I wasn't someone who could, that I'd fail someone again the way I failed her." "You didn't fail her," Clara said. I wasn't enough for her here, he said. Whatever the reason, I wasn't enough. That's not failure, Clara said. That's grief. Those are different things. He was quiet. What I want to tell you, he said, is that I know the difference now between letting someone in and being afraid to, and I know which one I'm doing with you. Clara looked at the road ahead. I know, she said. I'm not afraid anymore, he said. With you. I'm not afraid. She reached across and put her hand over his on the reins. He turned his hand over and held hers. They rode the rest of the way home like that, and neither of them said anything more because nothing more was required. But everything had changed. Not in the dramatic way of storms and barnyard declarations, in the quieter, more permanent way of a foundation that has been poured and has set. Something that was there and would remain there. Something that was now part of the structure rather than resting on top of it. The spring came in the way. Colorado springs do aggressively without apology in a rush of melt and mud and the sudden reappearance of color from a world that had been white for months. The cattle that had come through winter came through it in better condition than Ethan had expected, which he credited to the supply management Clara had implemented in November, which she had credited to the things he had taught her, and they had gone back and forth about this credit a few times before Dutch settled it by saying from the doorway of the barn that the cattle didn't care who got credit as long as they got hay, and both of them had agreed that this was correct and moved on. The garden. Clara had planned all winter went into the ground in April. It was 3 times the size of anything she had managed in Ohio, which was to say it was ambitious in a way that made Dutch look at the staked-out plot with an expression of respectful skepticism. That's a lot of seeds, he said. We're a lot of people to feed, Clara said. There's 3 of us, he said. There will be more, she said. Dutch looked at her. She did not elaborate. He went back to his work. By the end of April, the news that there would be more of them was a fact rather than a projection confirmed by the doctor in Ridgeway, who examined Clara on a Tuesday morning and told her what she had suspected for 3 weeks. She sat in the wagon outside the doctor's office for a moment before going in to find Ethan at the general store. She thought about her mother, who had died when Clara was 12. She thought about the children her mother had carried before and after Clara, the ones who hadn't made it the ordinary grief of those early years that Clara remembered in the way children remember adult sorrows imperfectly in pieces, understanding it differently the older she got. She thought about Sarah Walker, who had died in this same process 4 years ago, and she thought about Ethan carrying it the way he carried everything quietly without complaint, waiting for it to become something he could live inside of, rather than something that was killing him. She sat in the wagon, and she breathed. Then she went to find her husband. Howe was at the counter in the general store, talking to the owner about spring cattle prices, and he looked up when she came through the door, and something in her face told him immediately that the conversation about cattle prices was over. "Excuse me," he said to the store owner without taking his eyes off Clara. He met her in the middle of the store. "Clara," he said. "Come outside," she said. They stood on the boardwalk in the April mountain air, just the 2 of them, and Clara looked at her husband's face at the careful attention in it, the slight tension that appeared when he was bracing for something, and she thought about all the ways she could say this, all the framings available, and then she set all of them aside in favor of the approach that had served her since the beginning. The direct one. "We're going to have a baby," she said. The tension in his face did not disappear. It changed quality, became something else, something that moved through several different emotions so quickly she could not track all of them. Fear, she saw it, and joy, beneath the fear and grief. Grief for a moment, the ghost of what he had lost before, and then something that rose above all of those and settled. "When?" he said. "October," she said. "The doctor thinks October." He stood very still. "Ethan," she said. "Talk to me." "I'm talking," he said. "You're standing," she said. "That's not the same thing." He looked at her. "I'm scared," he said. "I know," she said. "After Sarah." "I know," she said. "I know. And I need you to hear me say this. I am not Sarah. I am not fragile. I am not afraid of this place or this life. I am not going to die on you, Ethan Walker. I am going to be so stubborn about staying alive that you're going to find it mildly irritating for the next 40 years. Something shifted in his face. 40 years, he said. Minimum, she said. I've got opinions about this ranch that are going to take at least that long to fully implement. He made a sound. That sound short private, the one that came when she surprised him, but bigger this time. More of it. Almost the real thing. Clara, he said. Don't you dare cry on the main street of Ridgeway, she said. Mrs. Aldrich will see. He laughed. A full one. An actual laugh, unguarded, the kind that comes up from somewhere real, and Clara Walker stood on the boardwalk in the April mountain air and watched her husband laugh and felt something move through her that was so large and warm and complete that she had no word for it in her vocabulary and didn't try to find one. She just let it be there. He pulled her to him right there on the main street of Ridgeway, in front of whoever was watching, and held her with the same firmness with which he had held her hand in the barn, the grip of a man who has decided what he is keeping. Thank you, he said into her hair. For what? She said. For answering that advertisement, he said. For writing that letter. For telling me exactly who you were. For not being anybody different. She pressed her face against his shoulder. You're welcome, she said. You should thank yourself a little too. For what? For writing back, she said. He held her tighter. The spring deepened around them, and the mountains went green in the way they went green after a serious winter, gratefully, extravagantly, as if making up for lost time. The garden Clara had planted expanded beyond Dutch's skeptical estimate, and became by June something remarkable. Rows of vegetables and herbs that she managed with the same focused attention she brought to everything she had decided to understand, and that produced by the height of summer more than the three of them could use. She started bringing the surplus to Ridgeway. Not selling it. Giving it to the families in town who needed it. The miners' families particularly, who lived on narrow margins and ate a narrow diet, and sometimes showed the signs of that in the faces of their children. Ruth Caldwell noticed. You're feeding half the town, Ruth said when she stopped at the ranch one afternoon in July and found Clara packing a crate of vegetables for the following morning's trip. I'm feeding maybe 8 families, Clara said. The garden produced more than we can use. It seems straightforward. It's generous, Ruth said. It's practical, Clara said. Food doesn't keep indefinitely. People do better when they're fed. The town does better when the people in it do better. It's not complicated. Ruth looked at her for a moment. You know what Ethan was like before you came, Ruth said. I've known him for 3 years. He came to town for supplies and he went home. He spoke to people because it was necessary. He was... She searched for the word. Contained, like something that had been closed up against the weather. Clara said nothing. She kept packing the crate. He laughed in the feed store last month, Ruth said. Bill Garrett told me. Said he'd never heard the man laugh before. He laughs, Clara said. You just have to say the right things. And you know what those are. I've been paying attention, Clara said. Since the train. Ruth shook her head slowly in the way of a woman who is genuinely pleased by what she is observing. You're good for him, Ruth said. I hope you know that. Clara looked at the crate in front of her. He's good for me too, she said. That's the part people don't seem to account for. They say I'm good for him like it only runs one direction. He gave me a home when I didn't have one. He taught me this mountain. He looked at me on a train platform after receiving a letter from a woman who told him she wasn't beautiful, and wasn't small, and wasn't anything particularly easy, and he said he was glad I'd made it. She paused. You don't forget a thing like that. You build on a thing like that. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said quietly, No, I suppose you don't. The letter arrived in August. Not from Edna this time, and not from Margaret. From Thomas, Clara's brother, the one who had gone to their father's brother's farm in 1875, and whom she had not seen since the week after their parents' funeral, when they had held hands at the graveside and then been put into separate wagons, going in separate directions. Thomas was 22 now. He had the letter explained, learned her address from the Hargrove family, and had been working up the courage to write for 6 months. I think about you, Clara. I thought about you the whole time we were apart. I didn't know how to find you, and then when I found out how to find you, I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry that's how it was. I should have found a way sooner. I hope you are well. I hope whoever you're with is good to you. You always deserved someone who was good to you." Clara read the letter twice at the kitchen table. Then she put her head down on her arms. She did not make a sound, but her shoulders shook for a solid minute in the way of grief that has been held carefully in place for a very long time, and has finally, in the reading of 11 lines from a 22-year-old man who had been a 9-year-old boy at the last graveside, found permission to come forward. Ethan found her there when he came in from the yard. He stood in the doorway. He did not ask what was wrong. He could see the letter on the table. He came in and pulled a chair close and sat beside her, and put one large, steady hand on her back between her shoulders, and did not move it, and did not speak. He simply stayed. After a while, Clara raised her head. She did not apologize for crying. She had decided sometime during the winter that she was done apologizing for her own reactions to things that merited a reaction. "My brother," she said. "He wrote." "I saw," Ethan said. "He said he thought about me the whole time," she said. "I believe it," Ethan said. "He was 9 years old," she said. "When they put us in different wagons. He was 9 years old, and he held my hand at the graveside, and then they put us in different wagons, and I—" She stopped. "I always wondered if he remembered, if it mattered the same way to him." "It did," Ethan said. "That letter says it did." She looked at him. "I'm going to write back," she said. "And I'm going to invite him to come, if he wants. In the spring, maybe, or sooner, if he wants." Ethan nodded. "Of course," he said. "You don't mind," she said. "He's a stranger to you." "He's your brother," Ethan said. "He's not a stranger." Clara looked at her husband across the kitchen table in the August afternoon and felt something that had been quietly building all year reach its fullest shape. Not love exactly, though that was part of it. Something more structural than love. The understanding that she was in the right place with the right person doing the right work, building the right life. The kind of understanding that once it arrives, stays. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "I was wrong," she said. "About something." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "I told Edna when I left Ohio," she said, "that I'd rather have real than elaborate, and I meant it. But I didn't know then what real actually was. I thought real was just honest, just two people being straight with each other." She paused. "It's more than that. Real is this. What we've built here. That's what real is." He was quiet for a moment. "Then we're doing it right," he said. "We are," she said. Outside, the August mountain afternoon continued its unhurried business, and the garden grew, and the cattle grazed, and the ranch that Ethan Walker had built with his own hands over 2 long winters held everything that mattered to both of them inside its plain and solid walls. Clara Walker picked up her pen. She began writing to her brother. Thomas Walker arrived on a Thursday in late September, 3 weeks before the baby was due, and 6 days after a letter from him said he was coming, which gave Clara exactly enough time to prepare the upstairs room, and not quite enough time to prepare herself. She was in the garden when the wagon came up the road. Dutch had gone to collect him from the Ridgeway station, and she heard the wheels on the gravel, and she straightened up slowly, one hand going automatically to the round of her belly, and she stood there in the September afternoon and watched a young man climb down from the wagon seat. He was taller than she remembered. She did not know why that surprised her. He had been 9 years old the last time she'd seen him. Of course he was taller. Of course 13 years had made him into a man with wide shoulders and their father's particular way of standing weight forward, like someone perpetually ready to start moving. He saw her. He stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved, and then Clara was walking toward him, faster than a woman in her condition was strictly advised to walk, and Thomas crossed the remaining distance at a run, and they met in the middle of the yard, and he wrapped both arms around her with a force that lifted her slightly off the ground before he caught himself and set her down carefully. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean to—" "I'm fine," she said into his shoulder. "I'm not fragile. You're—" He pulled back and looked at her at the unmistakable fullness of her, and something moved across his face that was somewhere between delight and alarm. "You didn't mention—" "I mentioned it in the last letter," she said. The last letter arrived 2 days after I'd already left, he said. Then you found out the right way, she said. In person. He stared at her. Then he laughed. A young man's laugh, unguarded, the kind that comes up from the stomach, and Clara laughed with him, and Dutch watched both of them from the wagon seat with the expression of a man who was pleased by what he was seeing and intended to give no outward indication of this whatsoever. Ethan came around from the barn. Thomas straightened, extended his hand. Ethan shook it with the directness of a man who forms opinions quickly and keeps them to himself until they've been tested. You built all this, Thomas said, looking at the ranch. With help, Ethan said. Dutch helped, Clara said. And I reorganized the root cellar 3 times until it worked correctly. She did? Ethan confirmed. Thomas looked at his sister. You're happy, he said. Not a question. An observation carrying the weight of someone who had wondered about this for 13 years and was only now getting the answer. I am, Clara said. He nodded slowly, taking it in. Good, he said, and his voice went slightly rough at the edges. That's yeah. Good. Dutch climbed down from the wagon and began unloading Thomas's bag with the pointed efficiency of a man creating space. For a moment, he understood it did not require his presence. Come inside, Clara said. I'll make coffee. Thomas followed her into the house. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Clara had written to Edna, where she had read Ethan's first reply, where she had put her head down on her arms in August and cried for a 9-year-old boy and a pair of separate wagons. And he looked around the room with the careful, hungry attention of someone who has been wondering about a place for a long time and is finally seeing it. It's real, he said. What is, she said. All of it, he said. I used to try to picture where you were, after they took you to the Hargroves. I'd try to picture the house, the kitchen, what you were doing. He paused. I couldn't ever make it feel real. It was always just nothing, a blank. Clara set the coffee down in front of him. And now, she said. Now it's real, he said. He wrapped both hands around the cup. You're real. This place is real. He looked up at her. Clara, I should have found you sooner. I should have written years ago. I thought I was afraid that I'd be angry, she said. Yes. I'm not angry, she said. Thomas, look at me. He looked. I am not angry, she said. I am sitting in my kitchen in the Colorado mountains, 7 months pregnant with my brother at my table and my husband in the barn, and a garden that produced more food this year than I know what to do with, and I am not angry about a single thing. He held her gaze. She was hard on you, he said. Mrs. Hargrove. I heard things over the years, from cousins. She was what she was, Clara said. She gave me a roof when she could have given me nothing. I've made my peace with it. Have you? He said. She thought about it honestly. She wrote to me last winter, Clara said. In her way. She apologized in the way of a woman who doesn't have the word for it but knows what she owes. That was enough. She paused. I wrote back. We correspond now occasionally. It's not warm, but it's honest. I've found I can work with honest even when it isn't warm. Thomas shook his head slowly. You're different than I expected, he said. How did you expect me? She said. I don't know exactly. More hurt, maybe. I expected to find someone carrying more damage. Clara looked at her coffee. Oh, I carried it, she said. I carried it all the way to a train station in Ohio and onto a 3-day ride to Colorado and off a platform into the arms of a man I'd never met. I carried it for a while after that, too. She looked up. But you can't build anything worth having if you're using both hands to hold the damage. At some point, you have to set it down. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I want to be better at that, he said. Then practice, she said. That's all it is. Just practice. Ethan came in and poured himself coffee and sat at the far end of the table, and the 3 of them talked through the afternoon about ordinary things, about Thomas's work, about the ranch's coming winter preparations, about the baby. Thomas asked questions about ranch life with the genuine curiosity of a young man who had spent his life in flat farmland and was finding the vertical world of the mountains both strange and compelling. Ethan answered him with the same plain completeness he had always offered Clara. not simplifying, not performing, just stating what was true and letting the truth be sufficient. Clara watched her brother and her husband find their way toward each other across the kitchen table, and she felt something so full in her chest that she had to look away briefly out the window at the mountain afternoon going gold. Too much feeling required a moment of sky. The baby came in October, not on the morning Clara had expected, not in the ordered way she had planned for, but on a night when the first real cold of autumn had moved in, and Ethan was beside her, and Ruth Caldwell, who had appointed herself the practical authority on this matter, and had been coming to the ranch weekly for a month to ensure that everyone was as prepared as they were capable of being, was there, and it was hard, and it was long, and there were hours in the middle of it when Clara Walker held her husband's hand and did not think about Ohio, or the train, or the barn, or any of the things she had survived, because what was in front of her required everything she had, and she gave it. She gave it all. Just before dawn, their daughter was born. Ethan held her first. Clara saw his face in that moment and filed it somewhere permanent, the way you file things you know you will need for the rest of your life. It was not an expression she had words for. It was the face of a man receiving something he had believed for 4 years he would not be allowed to have again. Something he had grieved and closed the door on, and then slowly against his own careful protections had been given back. He brought the baby to Clara, and he sat beside her on the bed, and they looked at their daughter together in the early light. "She's looking at you," Ethan said. "She's looking at everything," Clara said. "She just got here. She's gathering information." "That's you," Ethan said. "Already." Clara looked at the small face, the profound, serious attention of a newborn taking its first inventory of the world. "What do you want to call her?" Clara said. They had discussed names. They had not decided. Ethan had said quietly that he wanted Clara to choose, and Clara had said she wanted it to be both of them, and they had arrived at a comfortable impasse that they had apparently decided to resolve by waiting until the person in question arrived and could be assessed directly. Clara looked at her daughter. "May," she said. "May Walker." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "After your mother," he said. "After the feeling," Clara said. "My mother was the last person who looked at me and saw exactly what I was without needing me to be something different. I want her to have a name that means that." Ethan looked at their daughter. "May." "May," he said. The name settled into the room the way right things settle, without effort, without resistance, simply into the place it had always been meant to occupy. "May Walker," he said. "Yeah." Thomas met his niece that morning standing in the doorway of the bedroom, with a look on his face that Clara would describe to Ruth Caldwell later as a man discovering that something he thought was abstract was in fact entirely concrete. "She's very small," he said. "She'll get bigger," Clara said. "They do." "She has your eyes," he said. "She has Ethan's chin," Clara said. Ethan, from the corner of the room, made no comment, but something in the set of his shoulders indicated that he was not displeased by this information. Dutch knocked on the bedroom doorframe an hour later, hat in hand, with the expression of a man attending a formal event he had not been certain he was invited to. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said. "Both of you." He looked at Ethan. "She looks strong." "She does," Ethan said. "Takes after her mother," Dutch said, and went back to the barn. Clara looked at the ceiling. "Dutch just paid me a compliment," she said. "He does that," Ethan said. "About once a season. You have to catch them." The weeks after May's birth arranged themselves into a new rhythm, not easier exactly, but fuller a life with more weight to it, in the way that good things have weight, the kind that grounds you rather than drags you. Clara moved through the days with the focused efficiency she had always brought to necessary work, now applied to the necessary work of keeping a small person alive and known, and she found to her own ongoing surprise that she was not afraid of any of it. She had been prepared to be afraid. She had been prepared to feel the inadequacy she had been told to expect her whole life, that she would not know how to be a mother, that she would not know how to do this thing correctly, that someone would look at her and find the performance insufficient. No one did. May looked at her with the clear-eyed confidence of someone who has no doubts about where she has landed, And Clara looked back, and the transaction was complete and sufficient. The letter from Edna arrived 3 weeks after May was born. It was longer than usual, and it contained a line that Clara read standing at the kitchen window in November, with the mountains gone to their winter gray, and then read again. I want you to know that I am glad you found your way out of here. I did not always make it easy for you to believe that you would. That is something I have to live with. I hope the child is well. I hope you know you were never as invisible to me as perhaps I allowed you to feel. Some people do not know how to show what they mean. I was one of those people. I am trying to do better. Clara folded the letter. She pressed it flat against her chest for a moment. Then she put it in the Bible with all the other letters. Ethan's first letters. Thomas's first. Margaret's letters. This one. The accumulated correspondence of a life that had been rebuilt from the ground up, letter by letter, honest word by honest word. She closed the Bible. Edna, Ethan said from the table. Yes, she said. She's trying. Good, he said. Yes, Clara said. It is. The twist arrived not in the form of a crisis, but in the form of Harold Voss, which in retrospect was perhaps more appropriate. He came to the ranch on a Wednesday in December one year, almost to the day since that first visit, when he had sat at Clara's kitchen table and suggested that Ethan Walker had made a poor marital decision. He came alone this time without the two men, without the studied authority of the prosperous landowner announcing his arrival. He came with his hat in his hands. Clara answered the door. He looked at her. Then he looked involuntarily at the child Clara was holding on her hip. May, 3 months old, regarding Voss, with the calm evaluating attention she had apparently inherited from both parents. Mrs. Walker, Voss said. Mr. Voss, Clara said. Come in. She stepped aside. He came into the kitchen and stood awkwardly, hat turning in his hands while Clara settled May against her shoulder and looked at him with the patient attention of a woman who had learned that silence made people say the things they had come to say. Is your husband in? He said. He is, she said. I'll get him in a moment. Was there something you wanted to say to me first? He looked at her sharply. She looked back steady and unhurried. He looked at his hat. Last winter, he said. I said something in this kitchen that I should not have said. I said it because I had a way of thinking about things that I have since reconsidered. He paused. I heard what your husband said to me in the yard that day. About the heifer. About the supply management. I made inquiries afterward. About what you'd done here. Inquiries, she said. I asked people, he said plainly. I asked Dutch. I asked the Caldwells. I asked Bill Garrett at the feed store. I asked Mrs. Aldrich. He stopped. Mrs. Aldrich had a number of things to say. Clara almost smiled. I imagine she did, she said. The point is, Voss said that I formed an opinion based on what a woman looked like and how she arrived, and not on what she'd done or who she was. And I was wrong. And I am aware that an apology a year late is worth considerably less than one at the time, but I am offering it anyway because it is what's owed. Clara looked at him for a long moment. May on her shoulder reached up and grabbed a fistful of Clara's hair with the decisive confidence of someone who has identified what she wants and seen no reason not to take it. Mr. Voss, Clara said gently, detaching her daughter's hand. I accept your apology. I accepted the more important version of it the day your cattle started crossing our East Range for a fair fee, which was the day my husband made clear to you that his wife's worth was not available for negotiation. She paused. But I appreciate you saying it directly. That takes something. Voss looked at her. You're not what I expected, he said. I know, she said. I've been hearing that for a year. I'm starting to think it reflects more on what people expected than on what I am. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Yes, I believe that's right. Ethan came in from the back, reading the configuration of the kitchen, his wife at the table, Voss standing with his hat in both hands, May on the shoulder with the quick comprehension of a man who understood rooms. He looked at Clara. She gave him the smallest nod, the one that meant it's fine, the one he had learned to read somewhere around last February and had trusted ever since. He shook Voss's hand. They talked business for 20 minutes, the spring cattle arrangement, an expanded proposal, a handshake on new terms. Clara made coffee and did not leave the room, and was not asked to, because the version of this ranch that existed now was not a version where the woman of the house was managed out of important conversations. When Voss left, Ethan came and stood beside Clara at the window, and they watched the wagon go down the road. "He apologized," Ethan said. "He did," Clara said. "Adequately. And I accepted it," she said. "Because holding on to it would cost me more than it costs him. I've done enough of that." She looked at May in her arms. "I don't intend to do it anymore." Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. "You know what Dutch said this morning," he said. "Dutch said something this morning," she said. "That's ahead of schedule." "He said the ranch runs better than it ever has," Ethan said. "He said it the way Dutch says things, which is to say he was looking at the cattle when he said it, and he didn't indicate in any way that he was actually talking about you." Clara smiled. "But he was talking about me," she said. "He was definitely talking about you," Ethan said. She leaned into him. May between them, and they stood at the kitchen window while the December afternoon did whatever. December afternoons in the Colorado mountains do, dimmed early went cold, pressed the world back to its essentials. The ranch held. It always held. 1 year. Clara stood on the front porch on a January morning, and she thought about the girl who had walked 3 miles to a post office in Ohio with a letter addressed to a stranger. She thought about her hands shaking on the pen. She thought about the train and the 3 days of hard cheese sandwiches and Mrs. Caldwell, who had said that fair was better than handsome because handsome didn't shovel the barn in February. She thought about a train platform and 4 words. She thought about a wedding with no flowers and a reverend who drove a battered buggy and 2 ranch hands with their hats in their hands. She thought about a wobbling kitchen chair. She thought about a barn in a blizzard and a rope around her wrist and a man's face in the lantern light, saying, "I love you the way you say things. You mean plainly without ornament, because the plain thing is the true thing, and the true thing needs no decoration." She thought about Thomas sitting at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup saying, "You're real." She thought about Edna pressing $2 into her hand at the door. She thought about the letter in the Bible with the line about 5 cups set instead of 4. She thought about May. She thought about the face Ethan had made when he held his daughter for the first time. The door opened behind her. Ethan came out and stood beside her on the porch with his coffee, the same way he had stood beside her on 100 mornings, and Clara did not have to look at him to know the exact quality of his presence, the warmth of it, the solidity of it, the way he occupied space beside her without filling it, leaving room for her own. "Cold," he said. "Yes," she said. "May's still sleeping," he said. "She'll be up in an hour," Clara said. "She's been waking early." "She's like her mother," he said. "She's like both of us," Clara said. "She's already got opinions about the feed schedule. She watches Dutch work with this expression." "I've seen it," Ethan said. "It's your expression." "What expression?" "The one that means you've identified something that could be done better, and you're deciding whether to say it now or wait," he said. Clara laughed. A real one. Unguarded, unheld, the kind she had learned to let happen in the year since she had arrived in Colorado, because she had learned finally that her joy did not require management. Ethan watched her laugh. "I love that," he said. "What?" she said. "When you do that," he said. "When you forget to be careful about it." She looked at him. "I'm not careful about it anymore," she said. "I know," he said. "That happened somewhere around March. I noticed." "You noticed." "I noticed things," he said, and his voice carried the quiet warmth that she had learned over 12 months to hear underneath the plainness of everything he said. The warmth that was always there, that didn't require announcement, that was simply the current running beneath the ordinary surface of daily life. She reached out and put her hand in his. He closed his fingers around hers. They stood in the January morning and looked at the mountains. Those enormous, patient, indifferent mountains that had been here before either of them, and would be here long after that, held this small ranch in their shadow, the way big things hold small things without gentleness exactly, but without malice, with the profound and sufficient indifference of something permanent. Inside May would wake soon, and announce herself with the directness of someone who had arrived into a world that had from the very first moment regarded her with complete and unconditional welcome. Inside, Thomas would come down from the upstairs room and pour his coffee and sit at the kitchen table and be simply present the way he had been present every morning since September. Filling the space in Clara's life she had not known was still empty until he came and stood in it. Inside, Dutch would knock on the back door before sunrise and say, "Morning, ma'am," with the same three-syllable economy he brought to everything, and the day would arrange itself around its necessary work. Clara Walker, née Whitmore, stood on the porch of the ranch that she had helped build, not with her hands, not originally, but with her knowledge and her stubbornness and her willingness to learn and her refusal, the absolute bone-deep refusal to be smaller than what she was, and she felt in the cold January air the full measure of where she had arrived. Not at the end of anything, at the beginning of everything that was going to last. She had come to Colorado running from a life that had never wanted her. She had arrived at a life that was entirely her own, claimed, built, defended, loved, and real in every direction she could look. The girl from Ohio, who had been told in ways both spoken and unspoken that she was too much and not enough, that her body was a problem, and her heart was an inconvenience, and her future was a thing to be managed by other people's charity. That girl had walked 3 miles to a post office and mailed a letter to a stranger and changed the entire course of her life. Not because the stranger saved her, because she had saved herself first, and the stranger had been honest enough to see it. Ethan Walker squeezed her hand. Clara Walker squeezed back. And in that cold mountain morning, in that life she had chosen and fought for, and built from the ground up with honest hands and a willing heart, Clara Walker was completely, permanently, and without reservation exactly where she was always meant to be.